Hi, my name's Samuel Ellis and I'm a part of the Psi Sigma chapter at Swinburne University of Technology. I'd like to spend some time sharing our submission for the EY Elevate Your Leadership competition, which is centered on an exciting initiative that we've been developing, the Ascent Leadership Accelerator program. But before we get into it, where did Ascent start? Well, we had this realization that many students want leadership experience, but they don't always know where to begin. They may want to speak at events, but they'll feel nervous even just asking a question in a room full of people. They might want to lead peers, but they'll feel unsure about what leadership actually looks like when there's no formal title that's attached to it. They may want professional experience, but they'll only find themselves sitting in the audience, attending events without ever being asked to contribute, practice, or step forward. And this matters because leadership does not appear just because someone's given a position. It grows when students are placed in situations where they have to speak clearly, manage pressure, make decisions, and reflect on what they could do better next time. And this is what Ascent was created to address. It was designed to turn leadership from something students hoped they might one day feel ready for into something they could practice slowly and honestly in real settings. Ascent was created as a two-stage leadership program for Beta Alpha Psi members. The first stage focuses on learning. We want students to develop the building blocks of leadership through workshops on public speaking, communication, emotional intelligence, and ethical judgment. The second stage then focuses on application. Once students have started building these skills, they then need the chance to use them through panels, presentations, outreach, public-facing roles, and other settings where leadership moves from an idea into behavior. The structure, it's deliberately simple. First, students learn the skills, then they apply them. And sitting underneath both stages is the same belief. Students grow far more when they're trusted with actual leadership responsibility. And so our objectives reflected this belief. We wanted Ascent to build confidence across our chapter, especially in communication and leadership. We wanted students to develop practical skills, including public speaking, group guidance, judgment, and professional communication. We wanted to create a clearer leadership pathway so students could see how to move from membership into chapter roles, university representation, and community-facing work. We also wanted to strengthen our engagement, not through empty activity for the sake of being busy, but through shared work that gave members a reason to feel connected to the chapter and to each other. And finally, we wanted students to apply leadership publicly, because at some point, leadership has to leave the page. It has to be spoken out loud. It has to be tested in front of people. It has to survive the nervous pause, the unexpected question, and the moment where someone looks around the room and realizes that they are the person expected to speak. And that's the moment that Ascent was built for. But unfortunately, after submitting our initial proposal, the Psi Sigma chapter entered a period of restructuring. There were changes within the executive committee, changes in our chapter's working capacity, and a much tighter ability to recruit, plan, and run the full chapter-wide version of the program within the competition period that we initially imagined. This created a problem. The original model, as we originally proposed it, was not something we could deliver within the timeframe we had left, at least not in the way we initially imagined. And we didn't want to force a weak version of the program just so that we could say that it had happened. It wouldn't serve our members, it wouldn't serve the purpose of Ascent, and frankly, it wouldn't have been honest. So we had a choice. We could treat the changed circumstances as the end of the program, or we could treat them as the first real leadership test that Ascent was asking us to meet. So we chose the second option. We adapted Ascent into an executive committee pilot. That meant delivering a focused version of the program to the executive team. This gave us a smaller, more manageable way to test the program while still staying true to the original design. We could test the learning side of the model through a targeted workshop. We could apply the leadership side of the model by generating pathways for our executive members to speak, host, present, interview, and represent the chapter within the university and within the community. We could also begin building materials that other chapters could use, including workshop slides, reflection prompts, survey questions, and guidance documents. So the pilot was not just a retreat from the original idea. It was a more responsible first version of it. A smaller first step, yes, but not a smaller ambition. Stage 1 of Ascent focused on leadership development workshops. The idea was to give students the foundation before we ask them to perform. Because it's one thing to tell someone to go and speak confidently. It's another thing to show them how to structure their thoughts, manage their nerves, answer a difficult question, and recover if they lose their place. That's what Stage 1 was meant to do. The public speaking and executive communication workshop became the primary workshop in our pilot. It was designed to be practical, not just vague advice about being confident. It wasn't published theory that sounds good but disappears the second someone's handed a microphone. The workshop focused on what students actually need when they're asked to speak. We covered how to structure a short speech so the audience can follow it. We spoke about clarity and delivery, including how to speak with purpose and avoid burying your point. We looked at presence, not just as a performance trick, but as the ability to hold attention and sound like you believe what you're saying. We discussed nerves, because pretending they don't exist helps absolutely no one. And we worked through impromptu questions, including how to pause, clarify, answer, expand, and close when you don't have much time to prepare because you're on the spot. That last part matters because many student leaders aren't nervous about the speech they prepared. They're nervous about the questions that they don't see coming. The purpose of the workshop was to make public speaking feel less mysterious, less intimidating, and far more learnable. Whilst the public speaking workshop was the centre of Stage 1, it wasn't the only leadership development activity we ran as part of the Ascent program. Josh Farr's session on personal branding helped broaden the program into leadership identity. This session asked students to think about credibility, authenticity, and how they present themselves before they even step into a formal leadership role. This is especially useful for students who do not see themselves as the loudest person in the room, but still have something meaningful to contribute. Adrian Shaw's session, which focused on judgment and ethical decision making in the finance industry, connected Ascent to the professional responsibility in leadership. That session helped students think about integrity under pressure, difficult decisions, and the kind of judgment that's expected in accounting, finance, and advisory careers. And together, these workshops showed that leadership is not just about speaking well. It's knowing what you stand for, it's knowing how to decide, and it's knowing how to carry yourself when other people are watching. And then came Stage 2, which moved from learning into application. This was the part of Ascent where leadership had to be used beyond the workshop environment. Our original plan was to give students applied experiences through panels, outreach, presentations, and public-facing roles. In the pilot version, we used the executive committee as the first group to demonstrate those activities and to build the necessary connections to supply our wider membership with these same opportunities. And through the help of the Ascent program, we were able to secure them opportunities that tasked them to speak at events, host sessions, appear in interviews, support students, and take part in activities that required communication, judgment, and confidence, all incredible leadership skills. Our executive members were involved in event hosting, introducing speakers, guiding professional conversations, and helping events run smoothly. Others were involved in presenting and public speaking, where they had to speak to audiences, answer questions, and share their experiences in a way that was honest and useful. We've also included interviews and media where members shared their personal stories to the masses. These experiences matter because they're not rehearsed classroom activities. They are real settings with real people, real questions, and real pressure. That is where leadership becomes visible. Stage 2 showed that Ascent was not only preparing members to lead at some later point, it was helping us strengthen Stage 1's knowledge by allowing participants to practice and reflect. Now, Ascent began with the Executive Committee, but the reach of the program sits wider than that. The Executive Committee members were the first participants in the pilot. They tested the workshop model and underwent much of the applied leadership. But general chapter members are the next group. They're the people we're going to be bringing into the broader rollout in the coming semester. Academic staff also played a role, both through governance and through helping facilitate various leadership development sessions. Swinburne students were reached through panels, events, and student-facing leadership activities. High school students were reached through outreach and public speaking opportunities where members represented the university and helped prospective students understand what university life can look like. Industry professionals contributed through Stage 1 workshops, particularly where the program touched on finance, judgment, and professional responsibility. Student clubs and societies were also part of the broader audience for professional events. And finally, future Beta Alpha Psi chapters. They're a big part of this next phase. Through the Ascent toolkit, they'll be able to take the materials we've built and adapt them for their own members. So, although the pilot began internally, its purpose was always broader than the executive committee alone. But we wanted to measure whether the pilot made a difference. The survey results shown here compare average confidence levels before and after the workshop. And across every measured area, confidence increased. These numbers matter because they're tied directly to the skills the program was designed to build. Public speaking, managing pressure, answering unexpected questions, and contributing thoughtfully in professional settings. The results tell us that the workshop did what it was meant to do, gave participants more confidence, not by pretending public speaking is easy, but by giving them a structure that they could rely on. But those are merely just numbers. These reflections give us a more personal view of the same story, not just averages. One participant wrote that they learnt their leadership style was strongly action-oriented, but that they often held themselves to a high internal standard before stepping forward. But what changed through Ascent was this idea that leadership does not require someone to feel perfectly prepared. It just requires them to show up, make decisions, and adapt in real time. Another participant reflected on public speaking itself. Before the workshop, they saw it as something a person either naturally had or did not have, which is a common misconception. After the session, it felt much more practical. They had a structure that they could rely on, especially when speaking without much preparation. And a third reflection connected the workshop directly to applied leadership. This participant said the most meaningful part of Ascent was seeing how the skills connected to real executive roles. The workshop was not separate from chapter leadership. It supported the way members speak, lead, and represent the chapter. And that's exactly what we hoped Ascent would do. Not just teach leadership as an abstract idea, but to connect it to the actual work students are already doing. But there are also outcomes that we did not fully expect when we first proposed the program to you. The first was that the executive committee became the very first test group. In the beginning, as we've mentioned before, we imagined rolling Ascent out much more broadly, but because of our chapter's restructuring, we unfortunately had to start with the people responsible for carrying the chapter forward. But this turned out to be a strength. It meant the people leading the chapter had to practice the very same skills we were asking others to develop. The second was that the pilot made the program much more practical. A smaller version helped us see what future participants and chapters would actually need. Workshop materials, clear structure, reflection prompts, survey tools, and applied leadership opportunities that are realistic to organize. The third was that Ascent became easier for others to use. Because we had to adapt the program, we began creating resources that could be reused. That includes workshop materials, those survey templates, evidence templates, things like that. And what began as a constraint became part of the reason that Ascent is now much stronger. It forced us to build something real, not just something ambitious. But where to next? What's the future? Well, the next phase of Ascent can kind of be broken down into three parts. First, we've got member rollout. We want to expand the workshops beyond the executive committee and begin to offer them to general chapter members. We also want to embed Ascent into officer development so future leaders receive support before they're expected to lead. Secondly, chapter expansion. We plan to create more workshops and more applied leadership opportunities, including panels, outreach, event hosting, and other student-facing roles. We also want to prepare an implementation guide so other chapters can begin to use the same structure. Thirdly, long-term vision. We want Ascent to become a recurring leadership pathway within Psi Sigma, not just a one-off event, not a competition submission that ends when the deadline passes. We want it to become a repeated program that helps students build confidence through practice. Because if leadership is a habit, then it needs repetition. It needs a place to be practiced more than once. And this is where the Ascent Toolkit comes in, which is how we make the program usable beyond this submission. Inside the toolkit, You'll find workshop slide decks, outreach templates, facilitator notes, reflection questions, event planning checklists, even sample scripts, and survey templates. The purpose is simple. If a future Psi Sigma executive committee wishes to run Ascent, they shouldn't have to start from nothing. And if another Beta Alpha Psi chapter wishes to adopt this model, they should be able to access the resources, adjust them to their own setting, their own chapter culture, and begin to create the industry leaders of our future. And this is one of the most useful things that came out of this pilot. We didn't just test an idea. We began building the materials that allow the idea to survive beyond the people who first created it. And that matters because student leadership programs often disappear when committees change. The toolkit is designed to stop that from happening. Leadership is not about perfection. It's not about sounding polished every second or pretending to have every answer. It's about learning how to stand in front of people with enough honesty, confidence, and clarity that they can trust you. For our chapter, Ascent began as this idea about leadership development, but through this competition, it became something much more tangible. A workshop, a pilot, a set of reflections, a collection of leadership evidence, a toolkit, and most importantly, a reminder that students do not need to wait until they feel completely ready before they begin leading. They need a place to practice. Ascent gives them that place. Thank you.